Woo! Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And it's time for a tier list. I know it's rare that I'm doing these things, but the idea to do one for Modest Mouse, legendary Washington indie rock band Modest Mouse, just occurred to me. I had a passion, just a desire, a drive to do it. So I figured with the band's discography being as trim as it is and having a few strong opinions on some of their key records, it would make for a fun little video to do. So let's get into it. So look, for anybody who is unfamiliar with Modest Mouse's music and what exactly makes Isaac Brock's songwriting so spectacular and unique, also his vocal and guitar style too, you can use this video as a bit of a primer. Anything that ranks super high in this video, I recommend that you try the records right away. If you are unfamiliar with their stuff, it should give you a very quick idea as to what exactly the band does. So let us kick things off with the band's famed label debut from 1996. Not the first project the band ever recorded or released. There are some early records that I will talk about a little bit deeper into this video, as Sad Sappy Sucker is a kind of a reissue, a revisit to that era. But again, I would say the first big label proper introduction to Modest Mouse, pretty much fully formed, I would say, really out of the demo stage, is this record. I love this album. Generally, the Modest Mouse fandom loves this record as well, even if much of the time it's not ranked the highest album. That would really be their next album in 1997, which we will get to. But in a lot of respects, I feel like this record is very much on par with their next LP. Mostly the reason I say this is because I find Long Drive to have such a unique sound and vibe in the Modest Mouse catalog that I don't think was ever really captured again. I love the twinkly, bare, naked, slightly reverbed guitars all over this album. How relaxed and hypnotic, yet also tense and dark and emotionally pained a lot of these songs are. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some rockers and some ragers on this LP that are incredible, but the parts that really hit me the hardest and seem the most unique to me in the Modest Mouse catalog are the moments that are the most spacey and, again, if I haven't said it, meditative. This may seem like a weird reference point or comparison to make because Modest Mouse isn't really viewed through a post-punk lens a lot of the time, but the atmosphere and the ability of this record to just put me into a lull reminds me of, I don't know, a classic LP such as Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures. And because of how much praise Moon and Antarctica as well as Lonesome Crowded West get, I feel like a lot of fans don't really approach this album in that way. They sort of take the harder tracks, they see the more aggressive tracks, and how those almost kind of paved the way for what was to come, and think, okay, that's sort of like a lesser version of what would come down the road. Still good, great, but obviously got improved down the road. And in my opinion, no. I love how stripped back and in a lot of respects like minimal this record is. And it's that bareness, it's that nudity that makes this album so special. And look, Modest Mouse's following records to a degree are certainly raw, and that's what makes them special as well. But this is like an incredible amount of intimacy that is being displayed on this record. I'm going to put it in the A. I'm going to put it in the A, right in the A, bam. On a great day, I would even put this as S, but I mean, I'll say A. Band's next LP dropped in 1997, Lonesome Crowded West. And as I was alluding to, a lot of elements of the band's debut were sort of refined on this new record. I mean, you had the elements of indie rock and lo-fi and Midwest emo kind of being developed into this super monster on Lonesome Crowded West, where you were actually getting also influences from folk and country music as well, and even noise rock to a degree. And Isaac Brock's songwriting and lyricism was just like on point Just on fucking point on this record. There are a few longer cuts here that I think display a similar magic to the band's debut, but if anything really makes Lonesome, Crowded West an incredible record, it's just how hard-hitting it is, how consistent it is, consistently well-written it is, how fiery the performances are. It's just such an engaging album. The songwriting, the riffs, the vocal performances are all so quality. They're all so good. Like, there's not a single moment on this record that is not hitting. Not only is this a fantastic record in Modest Mouse's catalog, this is also just like a, fantastic like top 10 indie record across the genre type of release. Even the tracks that are a bit lengthier, dirgier, seem like they have an incredible sense of purpose. Everything is driving very clearly to a point while still maintaining a wild kind of chaos that fans can hear if you go back and listen to the band's demo stuff. But here it's just kind of like very honed, it's very toned, it's very trained, and it sort of knows what it wants to do, and it does it, as opposed to the early shit where it's kind of like the band is, just throwing whatever out there and seeing what sticks. Again, mega classic, fantastic LP, lots of praise, and deserves every single frickin' ounce of it. I would put this in the Esk Malach. No question. Following that, it took the band several years to get out their follow-up to this, the Moon Antarctica. This is a very praised LP, very beloved LP. If I am correct, this was the band's transition over to a major. Early 2000s, indie rock was commercially making a move, and a lot of bands got snatched up by majors, put out big singles, so on and so forth. And Modest Mouse, I think, was like really one of the best to do it, at least like on the mainstream side, because for the most part, they really like maintained their artistic authenticity no matter how commercial their stuff got. There are some bands, and the point of this video is not to start listing off, names and calling people out or whatever, but like as soon as they got a bit of shine, a bit of commercial attention, their sound was just utterly cheapened and watered down to the 10th degree, made absolutely drab, absolutely boring, and that was just really not the case for Modest Mouse. Having said that, though, the Moon Antarctica is not a record I would praise as much as a lot of people in the fandom would. I praise it and I respect it for just how daring it is for an indie record in the early 2000s signed to a major, because this is very much not a super commercial LP for the band. Modest Mouse even stylistically made a bit of a transition on this one over into more of like an art rock style on some tracks, as well as embracing some elements of psychedelic music as well. And while there are some exciting ragers on this one that I like quite a bit, a lot of those more psych-influenced songs, in my opinion, were never some of my favorites in the band's catalog. I have consistently found them, no matter how many times I return to this thing, to be just a little too washed out and not really complimentary to the very raw and unique aspects of Modest Mouse's sound. What I think has made the band so special and interesting over the years are just the bareness, the upfront everything they sort of just throw right up in your face. And the Moon and Antarctica was really like a departure from that in a lot of ways. It's by no means a mediocre album. I don't think there's a terrible song in the bunch, really, but would I give it like A tier, S tier? Not necessarily. I think it's a solid B record from the band. Modest Mouse's next LP is when the band really hit commercially, really truly hit commercially, and that is a good news for people who love the bad news. Ba-bam, here it is. This is a record that I think a lot of Modest Mouse fans don't rate high enough. I think this is a very good album. Sure, I understand that, the indie code at this time was like, if it's popular, it's not that cool. And, it's such a big departure from the band's original sound. It really is, like with the more blaring guitars and the horn sections and the more dramatic instrumentation across the board. And of course, you have the shimmering float on this LP as well, which is almost like the sweetest presentation you could ever get of Modest Mouse's music. But that being said, it is a great song. Even Modest Mouse at their most commercially appealing on this record, you have to admit there was still a lot of artistic substance being offered there. Maybe it doesn't seem so weird nowadays because indie rock and bands like Modest Mouse are so, I guess, commonly accepted. But when this stuff and this sound was fighting to get like any mainstream attention or acceptance whatsoever, like records like this were not dime a dozen. You weren't just stumbling across records like this every direction you turned in. And in fact, today you still don't stumble into records like this very often because, my God, it's such a well-produced, dramatic, and fantastically bold, bright, and colorful LP that I just don't think gets enough praise in the Modest Mouse fan base. I'm going to give it an A. I'm going to give it an A. Put it in the A column. I really do think it's that good. I love it. I come back to it quite often for reasons that are different than, Long Drive and Lonesome, but I think it's a fantastic record. Following this, we have the band's follow-up to that a few years later. It is their 2007 LP, We Were Dead Before the Ship Even Sank, and this album is a respectable album. If for a lot of Modest Mouse fans, Good News is the beginning of the end, then this record is really like we're in the middle of the end times in a way. With that being said, even as Modest Mouse were on a major label and with this LP, like really focusing on the next batch of singles in order to like recreate the rollout magic of their last album, I still think they maintained quite a bit of artistic authenticity. If anything really makes this record a lacking one in the Modest Mouse discography, it's that artistically, I feel like the band really failed to continue pushing forward on this one. Rather than building on the ambitious instrumentals and theatrical songs of Good News, or even going anywhere else trying something new, this LP feels more like the band dialing it back to some of their more classic LPs, like getting back to the basics of the indie rock style that they came up with in the first place, but trying to deliver the most direct, commercially appealing, punchy, and no-nonsense version of that they possibly could. There are a few cuts here and there on this one that have a distinctly like dance and post-punk influence style, like a bit of a Talking Heads or even like an XTC influence, which I guess is sort of new, but it's not a sound that dominates the direction of the entire record or anything. It's just sort of a side dish to this overall, I guess, buffet style presentation of, hey, here's like a little bit of everything we've done up until this point, but maybe not as daring or as risky as you had heard it before. And look, I think there is certainly artistic merit in trying to break down a lot of those elements, simplify them, and present them in a catchier context. And certainly some good songs, result from that process. But the result overall as an album still stands as one of like the less bold and I guess intriguing projects in the band's discography. I would put this in the C section. And then I also want to give a shout out to this reissue, Sad Sappy, that I alluded to earlier, Sad Sappy Sucker. Look, a lot of Modest Mouse's early stuff I actually find as a fan to be pretty intriguing. I know a lot of those early records don't really catch a lot of positive ratings, even from like hardcore fans, and it's for good reason. Like the recordings aren't fantastic, the songs aren't particularly like well developed. A lot of tracks just kind of cut out early or will present like a rough idea, and then there's like no real sense of structure beyond there. there. And of course, the vocals and guitar playing are nowhere near as honed as they would be on later LPs, but still, there are a lot of cool ideas, presented on Sad Sappy Sucker and just those early projects in general. I think it's a record that you're not really going to enjoy or get unless you're already like familiar with a lot of early indie rock or emo, or you've sort of acclimated yourself to the Modest Mouse catalog, and then you go back and you sort of see like what a lot of these great sounds and ideas sounded like in, kind of an incubation period. I think there's some great ideas here. I think there are some good performances as well. It's decent for what it is, for sure. Let's finalize things here with, I don't think this is going to be the last record from Modest Mouse ever. It's certainly the last record they put out back in 2015, 6 years ago. You guys can catch a review for this one on the main channel, and I was not very happy about it. This is quite a mediocre record by all accounts. Modest Mouse fans generally don't like it. I don't like it, and it's mostly because it's a total and complete mess. I actually think this is less likable than even some of the band's earliest and roughest demos, because at least even they have some kind of sense of identity, and I just don't think this record does. Like, singles were terrible. Isaac Brock and company just like dabbling in a lot of sounds and rock variants that don't really complement their style, or they haven't worked on hard enough to really kind of put their own mark on it. Songwriting is definitely off and basic. It's just a really uninspired album in pretty much all ways. And while I think that is apparent to pretty much anybody who listens to music critically, I feel like you don't really get the full scope of that true disappointment. Like, once you've heard where the band was, like at one point creatively, and how far they had to fall in order to just make this incredibly inadequate batch of tracks. It was almost spelled out in the fact that it took so long for this record to come out, and the teasers were just so subpar that it seemed kind of like the band was just out of ideas at this point, which, you could argue that their last album was a little out of ideas too, but at least there were some good songs and, decent performances there to kind of mitigate that. Strangers to Ourselves, though, just really doesn't offer much. If I'm looking at these as like letter grades, I don't even really see this record as passing, frankly. I think I'm just going to have to leave it here. This is my Modest Mouse tier list, and let me know what yours would be down in the comments. I don't think mine's too radically different from what a lot of people would do, but you got my explanation and, my reasoning behind where I put everything that I did. And again, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a good one. Over here next to my head is a video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Modest Mouse, live forever.